Good evening, everyone. Um, I speak to you all in this moment as we finish out this Saturday, acknowledging that it has been a long day and we still have a long struggle, not only in this weekend. And I want to come before you as an instrument of love. I want to first acknowledge our babies in the room, all black, brown, and white, children under 17. Well, if you think you're a kid, just, raise your hand, or if you're too little, your parents raise their hands for everyone to see. For our young people that are in college, that are in this space because they are looking for the mentorship and the parents that they couldn't grow up with, even when they do have parents, but that the system breaks us down. And for those that are in the crowd that are the age of parents and grandparents who are looking to love in this space, who are looking to nurture those of us who are young. I want for all of us to know that this empire that we live under, it's only 500 years old. Just remember that, it's only 500 years old. The Roman Empire was only 300 to 500 years old, and it fell. So under an incredible revolutionary amount of love, I am not afraid, I am not tired, and I believe that we will have a future where Black lives will be the foundation, will be liberated, so that all of us can be liberated. And I just want you to do one thing. Ricky Sanders said something along the lines of, you can't merely bring people together in a space and expect them out of nowhere to develop a love for each other, to develop relationships with each other, to come together, to create unity. What I want you to do in this moment is intentionally look at the people besides you. Look into their eyes and acknowledge the fear that they have in acknowledging you, the love that they have for you. I mean, it's funny, but you see? No, it's good, it's laughter, it's happiness. That's why we're here, yes! Thank you, that's it, that's all. You guys want to make sure to center this space in that joy and that happiness, and to know that everyone that's in this space is because we believe in Black liberation. Because we believe in all of our liberation. So we have no room for disruption, because we're all united on that front in this room. Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. So lovely to be here. The Black radical tradition is a wide river with many streams in search of an ocean called freedom. It's a wide river with many streams in search of an ocean called freedom. The last panel this evening has a title called Police, Prisons, and the Neoliberal State. Everybody understands the two words that begin the title of the panel, police and prisons. These are clear. These, nobody can be surprised by. The third category, the neoliberal state, is confusing. And sometimes that third category becomes a word we use, but we're not always sure we understand what it means. It's like words that are given to us and we accept passively, but we don't really understand what they're doing to our analysis. So let me just spend a minute or so giving you my understanding of the neoliberal project. Neoliberalism is not something different from capitalism. Capitalism is the social and economic set of institutional arrangements that govern our lives. In the 1970s, the capitalist project, the capitalist system, the capitalist institutions ran into some serious difficulties. There was an uprising from the global south, manifested by countries in the United Nations that refused to accept the writ of the global north. Trade union movements were quite robust in the 1970s. In the United States, that was a decade of fierce trade union struggles, more strike days in that decade than in the previous decade. All of this bothered the managers of the world. Secondly, there were major shifts taking place in the nature of global production. Using those shifts, the managers of the world order decided to push a very strong agenda against the trade union of the global south and the trade unions in the global north. They developed a set of policies which began to influence the era that we continue to survive through. In other words, neoliberalism was a direct attack at working class people the world over. Neoliberalism was the restoration, the return of class power of the elite. Neoliberalism is not magic. It is a project articulated by intellectuals, pushed through by governments, backed by militaries. It took place in the cities of the global north. It took place in the countryside of the global south. It took place in the countryside of the global north and the cities of the global south. We forget that there are also farms in America. And during the break, I met young organizers who were working with black farmers, a constituency much ignored in the struggles that we have been fighting and waging. Neoliberalism is not magic. I don't want you to think of it as a word you just use in your vocabulary to describe something that is not clear. It must be sharply understood. Neoliberalism is the ruling class's attack against the planet. The ruling class then goes on strike. They refuse to pay tax. They starve the cities. They starve social programs. They drive people to desperation. People then are thrown into open-air prisons. They are thrown into the lap of the police. The police, the prisons, and the neoliberal state. It is my great honor and privilege to moderate this panel. It's going to be a little bit on the fly because we're waiting for a phone call at some point from Comrade Mumia Abu Jamal. Comrade Mumia has already phoned us, but we told him to call again. So let us hope that he is able to convince his jailers to allow him to use the phone again, because he, unlike us, faces a real restriction. You know about him. I won't spend much time introducing him, except to say, if you haven't read him, you must read Writings on the Wall, edited by Joanna Fernandez from City Lights Press. You must also support Prison Radio and listen to Mumia Abu Jamal, who I first heard articulate that remarkable closing line, "This is Mumia Abu Jamal, live from death row." Now, that last line has disappeared. And it has disappeared because of the struggle that we waged. So in a little bit, we'll have Mumia Abu Jamal joining us. We are also going to hear a speech that he delivered on Huey P. Newton. So that will also be part of the program. Then we're going to hear from somebody that Rahm Emanuel is terrified of. Now, I don't need to give you an enormous bio, Shaleen, but I want to say that what I found most interesting about your bio is that your politics sharpened in South Africa. And that's important. So the international is inside the domestic as much as the domestic is inside the international. Welcome. There is another book I'd like you to find yourself with, because this is going to be my reading it was already my reading today, but it will be my reading for the rest of the week at least, because I'll read it again and again. It's called Freedom is a Constant Struggle. This is the latest book from Angela Davis. I will read you one line from the book, or maybe I'll read you a few lines. Why not? Angela Davis writes, "What has kept me going has been the development of new modes of community. I don't know whether I would have survived had not movements survived, had not communities of resistance, communities of struggle. So whatever I'm doing, I always feel myself directly connected to those communities. And I think that this is an era where we have to encourage that sense of community participation, particularly at a time when neoliberalism, remember neoliberalism, when neoliberalism attempts to force people to think of themselves only in individual terms and not in collective terms. It is in collectivities that we find reservoirs of hope and optimism." Thanks for being here. Thank you. So, what we're going to do, because we don't exactly know when Mumia will call back, is we're going to start his speech on Huey P. Newton, and then when he calls, we'll interrupt the speech, and then we'll go back to it. So let's have the speech from Mumia.
The genius of Huey P. Newton. To those of us who are alive and sentient, the name Huey P. Newton evokes an era of mass resistance, of black popular protest, and of the rise of revolutionary organizations across the land. To those of subsequent eras, youth in their 20s, the name is largely unknown, as is the name of his greatest creation, the Black Panther Party. To those of us now known as old heads or elders, such a transition from then to now seems almost unimaginable. But alas, looking out into the present world is proof positive that the old saying, history is written by the victors, has more than a grain of truth to it. History, it seems, is many things, but kind to the oppressed, it is not. It never has been. It is up to the oppressed of every generation to plumb the depths of history and to excavate the ore of understanding, to teach us not what happened yesterday, but to teach us why today is like it is, so that we may learn ideas to change it. For history belongs not so much to those who have lived it, but more so to those who have inherited it. It is in that spirit that we examine the life of Huey P. Newton. Huey Percy Newton was born in Louisiana, 1942, named for the populist Louisiana governor Huey Pierce Long, known in the state as the Kingfish. Like many blacks in California, Huey would carry the rhythms of the South in his speech, and when nervous, it would rise to a disconcerting twang. Perhaps this accounted for his self-consciousness, his wariness of speaking in public. His family, like tens of thousands of others, formed the last legs of the Great Migration of black flight from the apartheid South to the north and to the west. He would enter the streets of Oakland a slender, short, beautiful boy, and the prospect terrified him. For while his father thought the name Huey was a respectful tribute to a gifted politician, to the hard urban streets of Oakland, it was an invitation to an ass whipping. A scared boy does what's been done since the dawn of humankind. He tells an older brother. Walter schooled him to attack the biggest guy in the pack and how to prevail. Keyed by his fear, Huey would follow these directions explicitly. He would throw his fear at the biggest guy in the bunch in the form of his fists, for Big Brother Walter taught him that the biggest guy often had the biggest fear, bigger than his own. He also learned that the best defense was often a stiff offense. The English poet William Wordsworth said, "The child is father of the man." Lessons learned in beardless youth became the matrix of the man he became. In describing his thinking at the time, Elaine Brown, his lover and political comrade, quoted him as saying, "Every blood on that street was a potential threat unless I knew he was a friend. After my first fights, I recognized that they bled like me. By the time I became a teenager, I was challenging the first fool that looked at me wrong and walking around with an ice pick in a paper bag." As a direct consequence of these street battles, the young Newton boy earns a rather unflattering nickname, Crazy Huey. One can almost hear this Greek chorus whispered with a mix of fear and fascination. "Who that boy? Who you talking about? That pretty boy right there. Oh, don't mess with him. That's Crazy Huey." Thus, from his earliest youth until adulthood, Newton was on a war footing. How could this not mold a man? He was also a petty thief who took, to say the least, an unusual path to perfect his craft. To succeed as a thief, Newton studied the California Crimes Code. He would later write, "I first studied law to become a better burglar, figuring I might get busted at any time and wanting to be ready when it happened. I bought some books on criminal law and burglary and felony and looked up as much as possible. I tried to find out what kind of evidence they needed, what things were actually considered violations of the law, what the loopholes were, and what you could do to avoid being charged at all. They had a law for everything. I studied the California Penal Code and books like California Criminal Evidence and California Criminal Law by Frick and Alarcon, concentrated on those areas that were somewhat vague." Newton sought such vague laws because they could more easily be overturned as void for vagueness. Such street and legal study and experiences would prove valuable in the years to come, for this was the early to middle 60s, a time of emergent and roiling social discontent and upheaval. Rosa Parks and Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. were names known in black communities nationwide. Black students kicked off 1960 by sit-ins at lunch counters in the South that evoked ugly white violence. Before the year was out, over 70,000 students had engaged in sit-ins, black and white. By 1961, freedom rides rolled through southern states in protest to racial segregation, resulting in vicious violence by white racist groups like the Ku Klux Klan. By 1963, 4 black girls were bombed in a Baptist church in Birmingham, Alabama. They called it Bombingham. Soon, white and black civil rights workers will be murdered in Mississippi. As these events happened, a new invention called television carried these images into millions of black homes across America. It especially rankled blacks in the North, for most could remember Southern childhoods, and they knew in their bones that but for a chance bus ride north or west, it could be them, their baby sister, their brothers or fathers, who would have been brutalized, bombed, or shot by the racists. The Watts riot tore across Southern California on a hot night in August 1965, the result of police mistreatment of black drivers. For 5 nights, the ghetto burned. The petty crimes of Newton seemed petty indeed against such a backdrop of violence and terror. And the little guy who once looked at bloods on the street as threats began focusing on new threats, armed men, armed white men, clad in blue, cops, white cops, sneering cops, domineering cops, cops hired from the American South. They rode through Oakland like gangsters in blue, harassing blacks at will. These forces converged to energize and radicalize black youth throughout the community. Among them, 2 black students at a junior college in town, 2 alumni of Merritt Junior College, having read the speeches of Malcolm X and the essays of Frantz Fanon in The Wretched of the Earth, met to build a new, radical, and indeed revolutionary organization. Huey P. Newton and Bobby G. Seale would found the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. From October 1st to the 15th, both men would pen the organization's 10-point program and platform. Newton was 24 years old, Seale 30. The men hit the street organizing, and a revolutionary movement was born. It was pitched to black youth, especially ghetto youth, and they joined, and the organization grew. Young men and women would join, and perhaps for the first time in their lives, study not for a grade, but to learn about revolutionary ideas from struggles around the world: China, Cuba, Algeria, South Africa, Vietnam, and beyond. The BPP, it would later drop the self-defense weapons, would grow from its base of Oakland and expand to Richmond and Los Angeles and Seattle, Washington. But events occurring roughly a year after its founding would catapult the organization, in effect hydroplaning it nationwide, exploding it, sending it into over 40 cities across America. A hot summer evening, 1967, and a car stop by the Oakland police would result in Huey being charged with murder. 2 cops shot, and Huey sent to hospital with a gunshot wound to his abdomen. It gave birth to the Free Huey movement, and by so doing, changed the party's trajectory from a small regional group to a national one. Offices opened in Boston, in Baton Rouge, in Philadelphia, Chicago, Harlem, the Bronx, Winston-Salem, Omaha, Baltimore, Detroit, Jersey City, Kansas City, San Diego, and more. Where there were black communities, there were black militants, most moved by the masterful oratory and martyrdom of Malcolm X. These young brothers and sisters, mostly teenagers, formed the bulk of Black Panther membership. All of these brothers and sisters, thousands across the nation, joined in some degree because of their admiration, respect, and for some, veneration of the Minister of Defense. Most, too, did not know him. They never met him. They read of him and fell in love, some with him, some with his amazing vision of Black Panther Party. Because Newton was complex, so was his creation. It changed constantly as he changed and developed from a Malcolmite nationalist organization to a revolutionary nationalist, to a revolutionary internationalist, to socialist, to Maoist, to what Newton termed an intercommunalist. This was Newton's theoretical construct, that nations were but illusions, assemblies of flags, for in the presence of a global imperial power, such as the U.S., nations were at best communities. He believed that U.S. economic power shattered sovereignties, for those who controlled foreign economies actually controlled those states. The rest is subterfuge. In 1972, Newton, using intercommunalist theory, predicted the fall of the Soviet Union. 1972. While traditional Marxists ridiculed Newton's ideas, the Soviet Union shuttered its doors on December 26, 1991, 2 years after Newton's ignoble death on a street corner by a crack dealer. Complex, brilliant, self-taught, a PhD, fearless, full of fear, crazy, drug-fiend, beautiful, mad. Perhaps all of these epithets could at times describe the founder of the Black Panther Party and its Minister of Defense. If Panthers could have worshipped him less and loved him more, perhaps he would have survived. Perhaps the party would have survived. Perhaps a memory, if you will. The place, Death Row, Pennsylvania, circa 1996. Your speaker is in discussion with acclaimed women's writer Alice Walker. We're lamenting the passing of Huey. He should have been at a black college teaching.
Sorry. Good evening, Comrade Mumia.
Good evening. On the move.
I want to tell you that the room is crowded and everybody has been listening to you almost 3/4 the way through the speech on Huey P. Newton, and they're very interested to hear you speak to them for a few minutes.
Thank you very much. I want to greet Charlene Carruthers of Chicago and Dr. Angela Y. Davis. And I thank you for inviting me to this conference. As we meet tonight, amidst the storm and throng of embattled black life in America, as we witness the cop riots of violence against black life in the midst of neoliberal America, in the age of Obama, no less, it's vital that we learn the lessons of history, especially during the COINTELPRO era. As many of us know, history, real history, tells us more about today than yesterday, for it provides a roadmap of how we got here. Several days ago, I asked two very brilliant sisters, both with doctorates in history, what was the central objective of the FBI's COINTELPRO operation? Both women, being historians, drew on their memories to recall the now infamous memos of February and May 1968, where the goals to destroy, disrupt, and neutralize black leaders are stated. So both were right, to a point. I asked about their central objective, not their various goals. The central objective wasn't merely to destroy Martin Luther King. It was to replace him with a figure of their own choosing, to essentially take over the civil rights and black freedom movement by placing their puppet on the throne. I know. To most of you, this may sound paranoid or even fantastical, but that's only because most of you haven't read the transcripts of the famous church committee hearings of November and December 1975 in Washington, D.C. If you look it up, it's on pages 6 and 59. This plot was personally approved by FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, January 1964. It was in all but name an attempted coup, the toppling of a black leader to impose a puppet that they could control. It was, in essence, the same thing that happened in Iran, in Guatemala, in Haiti, in Iraq, and in many, many countries. What happened abroad...
This is a call from
Pennsylvania State Correctional Institution, Mahanoy.
This call is subject to recording and monitoring.
What happened abroad on the periphery of empire was tried here, in its interior. For in a white nation, blacks are eternal foreigners, aliens, and thus outside the realm of alleged constitutional rights. For if this can be done against a mild-mannered, non-violent Christian minister of the Gospels, what can be done against you? Under the surveillance and infiltration of the Black Freedom Movement and killings of people like Deputy Chairman of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party, Fred Hampton, in his sleep, by the way, we see that the FBI functioned as race police. They also demonstrated what we see all around us today, the culture of police impunity. For where else can you kill a man in his sleep and no one go to jail? The road from the state murder of Fred Hampton on December 4th, 1969, leads directly to the killing of young Laquan McDonald in recent days in Chicago. For both are expressions of the ugly and recurrent phenomenon of police impunity, the right to murder if the victim is a black person. Today, as the U.S. embarks on a new century, it's perfectly acceptable to large segments of the American populace to beat someone to death, to shoot them, to choke them to death, to even bomb them, as was done in Philadelphia, May 13th, 1985, the Moot House, especially if those persons are black, men, women, even babies, with perfect impunity. How can this be so? Historians show us that once we understand origins, we can then begin to comprehend outcomes. Most square traditional historians suggest that the role of police crossed the Atlantic after the founding of the Metropolitan Police in London, 1829. But American roots of police were born quite
This is
different.
a call from.
Pennsylvania State Correctional Institution, Mahanoy.
This call is subject to recording and monitoring.
And for different reasons. Founded as slave patrols in the 1720s in the Barbadian British colony of the Carolinas, the body of armed white men had one primary duty: control Africans as a large labor source. Their movements were monitored daily to protect the property of the landowning class. Africans called them paddy rollers, a term of derision, partly to mark them as poor Irishmen who rolled up on them on horseback. As a teenager, I heard my elders use the term whenever a police van rolled by. They called them paddy wagons for reasons similar to their ancestors. Times change, of course, yet some things remain. In this neoliberal era, when the political class sold the remaining shreds of their souls to the corporations and dispatched billions of jobs overseas under NAFTA and CAFTA, the role of police sharpened as they were equipped with weapons of war, ostensibly in response to fake wars on terrorism. We saw the real role in Ferguson, 2014, when unarmed black protests against police repression and state exploitation were met by automatic weapons, sniper rifles, tear gas, and tanks. Remember COINTELPRO? All of these acts, although illegal, were answered by impunity. The neoliberal state, now presiding over an open crisis of capitalism, goes one step better. In a moment of national fear, think 9/11, it passes the so-called Patriot Act, and voila, in one fell swoop, every crime of COINTELPRO is made legal. Home tap, constant surveillance, snitches and rats, black sites, secret prisons, no problem. Because it's all legal. Because everything police do in a police state is legal. But to quote Move's founder, John Africa, just because it's legal, don't make it right. Now, Black Lives Matter entered the cipher. Born by women, grown by women, nurtured by women. It is beautiful to behold. It's movement time again. We welcome you right on time. I conclude by suggesting some ideas on solutions. As a student of history, let me point to Dr. Huey P. Newton and the Black Panther Party's late ideas advanced in February, March 1980. Principally, they advocated the abolition of existing police structures, for they are often instigators of problems rather than solvers. Secondly, they proposed the establishment of a citizens' peace force, a series of bodies based on the community. Their role, moreover, would be based on principles of public service, not this madness we now see as a dystopic Robocop war against the people kind of thing. These are revolutionary ideas, not reform agendas. For to say the least, we now know that reforms promoted today by politicians and corporate think tanks, such as body cams, for example, are utterly failing and are a reliance on a technical fix that ignores the real nature of the problem. I thank you all, my dear colleagues, Charlene Carruthers, an impressive young organizer from Chicago, and Dr. Angela Y. Davis, the model of a scholar activist, who when I was a Panther teenager, I proudly protested for her freedom when she was a prisoner at the New York Women's House of Detention. Again, my thanks. On the move, long live John Africa, Black Lives Matter, long live revolution. This is your
Mumia Abu Jamal. Okay. Thank you so much. What Mumia did, which was brilliant, is he finished his lecture in the talk that he gave you just now. He segued, I told him right where we were in listening to the speech, and then he finished it up right here. He's the most brilliant man, a great intellectual, and he can do this like that. He remembers dates. Don't minimize the importance of remembering dates. We're going to move to Charlene, and okay.
Hey y'all. I'm from Chicago, so we say y'all. You know, my people are from Mississippi, so we say y'all. Hey y'all. So I really appreciate the chant that folks just got rolling, so I'm gonna share like two more. One that was popularized by the Dream Defenders is one of my favorites because oftentimes we don't actually believe that we can win. Right? We don't actually oftentimes believe that we can live in a world without police and without prisons, right? So I believe that we will win. I believe that we will win. I say. All right. I just got one more. It's real quick. I see some of my BYP 100 family in the back, so y'all know this. Unapologetically, black, 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 unapologetically, black, unapologetically, black, unapologetically, black, 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 black. We ready. We coming. We ready. We coming. Chant down Babylon, black people are the bomb. We ready. We coming. We ready. We coming. All right. I can do that all night. I'm an organizer. That's what we do. So I am beyond excited and grateful to be here in Philly tonight. As I prepared for this talk, I thought about the people who I would join, right? I was like, oh, okay. Dr. Angela Davis and Mumia Abu Jamal. She come on in. And so how does one, prepare to join, as Robin and D.G. Kelly spoke about earlier, such giants, right? Even when they tell us not to call them as such, right? But those two people have and continue to embody so much of what black radical thought and action are about, right? And action, emphasis on the action, right? They are intellectuals, but they also take action. Every breath that Mumia continues to breathe and refuses to not breathe is an action, right? Every moment that he refuses to give up is an action. A direct action, right, against the prison wardens, all those folks. But we are living in a moment where the fruits of the black radical tradition are blooming, right? They're being replanted and also re-engineered in what I believe is a spirit of black love. So I grew up on the south side of Chicago, running the streets of the back of the yards, Woodlawn, Gage Park, and Inglewood. I first learned about power while sitting in the welfare office with my mother, and also hearing my father tell stories of what it meant to train white men who would then later be promoted over him. I didn't have any of those fancy words, power, privilege, oppression. Those are things I learned through organizing. Actually, not in school. I learned them through organizing. Through organizing. And so, as national director of the BYP 100, which stands for the Black Youth Project 100, I get to work and organize with some of the world's dopest young black activists all over this country. They are amazing. Someone asked me earlier, what inspires me? They are a major part of what inspires me. I am them, they are me, to get up every single day and do this work. And so we hit the streets, yes. We run mass civil disobedience, yes. We develop public policy, and we work to hold elected officials accountable throughout the electoral process. But everything that we do is grounded in a radical ethic of black love, right? A black love, because without that, we can't do any of this. None of this happens. None of this moves, none of this operates. All that I do and what we must do must be grounded in the radical practice of black love. When and if we do that, a world without police, prisons, and neoliberalism is possible. When we ground ourselves in a radical practice of black love, a world where we deal with harms and conflict without punishment is possible. When we ground ourselves in a radical practice of black love, that means love in its most human form, in its most basic form, taking care of each other, holding each other accountable for our actions, right? Our comrades don't feel like taking up prison abolition as a fight because they fear that they have no other protection from an abusive partner or a family member who is black just like them. Our movement today is ready to take up that challenge because we have no choice but to do that. We have no other choice. Just as our ancestors had no other choice. Just as when the Haitian Revolution popped off, they had no other choice. They had no other choice. Because what stood between them and the white planter, the slave owner, the person who profited off of their land was them and their freedom, right? So they had no other choice. I actually just returned from Haiti with a class of young black folks. But when I say young, when I'm referring to them, they're like 12, 13, 14, 15. And they out here banging out direct actions, marches, rallies, sound critical analysis about the world. And for me, if we talk about the black radical tradition, we talk about neoliberalism, and increasingly more police and prison. We cannot talk about it without talking about Haiti and situating Haiti into that black radical tradition, right? We can't. Because it teaches us so many lessons, and it requires us to sit with many uncomfortable truths and realities, right? It teaches us some lessons about what does armed rebellion and revolution actually look like. Because lots of y'all pontificate, think in your minds about let's just take up arms. But let's look to Haiti, right? Let's think about how that opens up horizons for us and how that limits the work that we do, whatever that may be, right? It also gives us lessons about does it mean to have a country led by black folk, sometimes who are for black folk and who aren't for black folk. And what can we learn from that here, right throughout the diaspora? And so the black radical tradition, one thing that I've been struggling with all day today is that I feel that the story of the black radical tradition is perhaps very one-sided, while in reality it is full of contradictions. Full of contradictions. It is not one of perfection. At its best, it agitates and forces the world we live into seeing what is possible. At its best, the black radical tradition creates new institutions, reaffirms our humanity, stages 30-day hunger strikes to save a school on the south side of Chicago, exposes the complexities of the human condition, builds urban and rural farms, shuts down jails, builds on what our ancestors began, and continues to tell us what and show what is possible of humanity. At its worst, the most visible and powerful segments of the black radical tradition silences. It erases people on the margins of the margins, reinforces state violence against those same people, ignores the conditions of all black people within prison walls, including those who do not identify or we don't identify as political prisoners, turns a blind eye to the incarceration of women freedom fighters like C.C. McDonald, who is also a radical black trans woman from Chicago. Again, C.C. McDonald, who is also a radical black trans woman, because some of y'all might not have heard that through the clapping. And Marissa Alexander, who is also a black mother and a freedom fighter. Just to be clear, both of these women are freedom fighters. It also asks that some of us wait our turn. And it fights against thinking big enough to achieve what's possible. Simply put, the black radical tradition is full of contradictions. And my job as an organizer is to live and work within those tensions and to contribute to creating the type of world where we are all free. We live in a world where the reach of the prison industrial complex continues to expand, right? It's being exported. You know, if you understand the concept of cultural imperialism where there's a McDonald's and a Starbucks on every corner, don't be fooled. There's going to be a supermax prison in every country, right? Without struggle against that, right? I just learned of some news about them opening up a large prison in South Africa and Australia. America is exporting much of how it deals, much of its carceral state to other places in the world, right? So that's happening. We're seeing growing populations. Many people have noted the rise of black women and girls in the carceral state, yes, in prisons and jails and other modes of state supervision. Media sensationalism about prisons. You can turn on MSNBC or any other channel and see some like trumped up, glamorous, kind of voyeuristic view of what the carceral state looks like through prisons, right? And contradictions about who deserves prison and who doesn't are reinforced every day as we call for the imprisonment of murderous police officers and serial rapists. Contradictions, right? So we're in a campaign right now where we're calling for the firing of the police officer who killed Rekia Boyd. And some people have framed that, right? And we're like, any day now, the final decision will come down, and we've made more progress around that than has been made in decades around police violence. And some people question, this is not a structural change. Why are you doing this? What is the point of this? For us, it's about recentering, it's about centering the murder of a black woman, a young black woman, in this narrative about what police and state violence looks like for black people. Right? It's about going up against an extremely repressive police regime in the city of Chicago. And it's also about continuing to set precedents that continue with the winning of a reparations ordinance, right? That ain't never happened in the city of Chicago for survivors of police torture, right? And so while there are many contradictions in the black radical tradition, I am very clear that there should be no contradiction between living in a world with no police and prisons and the ongoing struggle for black liberation. Instead of a contradiction, those two should be working in concert with each other, and perhaps they look very much so as the same things. And let's not be fooled. From my mama to my auntie to my cousin to my neighbors, people still see safety in the police, right? Black folks still see safety in the police. And why wouldn't they? What are the alternative systems that we have built, right? In order for us to deal with the harm and the conflict that happens in our communities. The good news is that people are building some of these alternative systems, right? And for them not to just be alternative systems, but for them to be permanent systems, right? And so, before they tell me to get off the microphone. Okay, not yet? Okay, cool. All right, because they gave us a little limits. Okay, I got some more. Okay, cool. Word. So, it is along that thread, it is absolutely essential for us to look into ourselves and pull out what agitates us, right? I saw the movie Tangerine the other day. Tangerine is a movie about two black women who are trans and are sex workers in LA, right? In LA. And it goes through a day in their lives and the things that they're up against. And I was actually speaking with Aijin Poo, who leads the National Domestic Workers Alliance, about the idea of care. And the type of care I saw those women give each other, to me, tells me that if we took a moment to step outside of what makes us uncomfortable in this world, and we look to those who have been deemed most disposable by society, and how they take care of each other, how we take care of each other, there's a lot to learn there, right? It's when we look into those things that make us uncomfortable, the things that we don't know about, that we learn so much. The potential, the black radical tradition is looking into those things, right, that are uncomfortable, sitting with those things. And so I am too recovering from the things that I've been taught about myself, right, and the people I live in this world with. And for better or for worse, organizing is at the core of my personal rehabilitation plan, right? It is at the core of that. It is at the core of that. And organizing, specifically grassroots community organizing, and what many people have talked about all day in the neoliberal state, is full of seductions. It is full of seductions, be it what my brother Umi spoke about earlier, the seduction of individualism, and just overall the neoliberal state, what it tells us is possible if we focus on ourselves and we prioritize ourselves, right? And in this particular moment, don't be fooled. Like, blackness is kind of sexy in the media and with funders, philanthropic funders, and things like that. It is very seductive. It is extremely seductive. And I am in no position to stand on a high horse with any of these things. But I know that not just blackness, but also queer and trans experiences, it's like it's the new hotness, the new hot thing, right? But very soon, that can change the tide. We 2013, we get here. I've heard Jamala and Montega and other folks from OBS talk about how they just recently were able to fund staffing at OBS, right? They've been doing this work for decades, right? So while we cannot depend on funders, be it individuals or institutional funding, to fund our work or to fund radical and revolutionary black work, at the same time, we got to get serious about what it means to build alternative streams of funding, right? We got to get serious about that. And the great thing is that, again, people are doing this work. One thing that really grinds my gears is when I hear people say, this isn't happening. No one's doing this. Why aren't we doing this? No one took action. No one stood up. Nobody said anything. 9 times out of 10, you just didn't see it. Or you don't know about it. Or the people who stood up or the people who took action are people who are invisibilized to you, because every time a black trans woman dies in this country, black trans folks are standing up and doing things on behalf of her life, the lives that were lost. Every time. Don't be fooled. The rest of us are usually late, right? The rest of us are usually late. So the next time you think you hear somebody saying nothing being done, investigate a little bit more. So a few things. Abolition is also getting sexier, right? Prison abolition, abolition of police, everybody wants to talk about it and all that good stuff, which is dope. Like, I'm happy. Like, I'm one of those people in the past couple of years who's learned about even the possibility of living in a world without prisons or policing, right? What is extremely, extremely important, that the project of abolition is, yes, it is about dismantling things and tearing things down. It is also about building, right? It is about building up transformative and restorative systems, right? And not just alternative systems, but systems that become the norm. Systems that we can all go to. It is a large project, right? There's no one way to do it, but there is a pathway. And I'm learning myself. And I invite other folks who know way more about this, right, to share resources, These institutions that we create and these things that we're going after cannot just be reformist. They cannot be reformist. They actually have to not only just get to the root of the problem and have an analysis of capitalism, patriarchy, heteronormativity, cisnormativity, transphobia, misogyny, all those things, which are, they're important, right? But if it's a repeat of the same old stuff over and over and over again, then we're not going to get to the kind of world that we want to live in. Next, until all of us are included, none of us will be free. None of us. None of us. Right? None of us. Radical inclusion isn't simply add women and stir. Right? Have the black woman panel and stir. Add trans folk, just say the word and you get cookies and stir. No, we don't get cookies for doing what we're supposed to be doing. That's not how it works. Right? That's not how it has to work. So what radical inclusion means that it has to include people who are sex workers, word, people who work in drug economies. Because if we can orient ourselves towards the people who are not respectable, then liberation is possible. If we can orient ourselves to not be afraid to be black, to be unapologetically black, and to have black-only spaces where we heal and build, then liberation is possible. Our solutions will only be as complete as our understanding of the problem and as complete as the story we tell about the we, who the we are. Grassroots organizing and organizations are essential, particularly organizations that work to mirror the kind of world that we want to live in. So that means democracy, yes. That means struggling with accountability, yes. That means when sexual violence happens in our communities, we cannot sweep it under the rug. That means that we have to struggle. And when we say that we are black queer feminists, we have to struggle when we are directly confronted and challenged by those values. That's what that means. That is what that means. So, if it's cool with y'all, I want you to close your eyes. I want you to close your eyes and think about what a world without police and prisons would look like. How does that make you feel? Does that lift a burden from your shoulders? Could it lift a burden from your shoulders? What would it mean to defund policing in America and reinvest in the things that, or invest, because lots of these things have never been invested in things that actually keep us safe and build sustainable communities? What would that mean that when someone does harm against you, that they're actually held accountable for it in a way that is restorative to the community, to you, and to the community you live in, right? What does it mean to commit to that long-term project or struggle? What are you willing to give up? What are you willing to gain? And what are you willing to struggle with? I believe in my heart of all hearts that that is within every single one of us. We have the ability to keep each other safe. That doesn't mean community policing. I actually don't think that's a revolutionary idea. I do not think that us policing each other will create the kind of society we need, right? We got to completely dismantle our whole idea about what it means to deal with harm and conflict. Completely. So we have that within ourselves. And one of my favorite songs that Jonathan likes, who's back there, created, it really embodies for me like why I do this work, what continues to help me do this work. I do this for my sister, I do this for my niece, I do this for Marissa, Tanisha, Rakia, Mike Brown, Damo, all of them. It's because I love being black. I said I love being black. I love the color of my skin. It's the skin that I'm in, 'cause I love being black. Thank you.
Charlene Carruthers, thank you so much. That was incredible. And now, when you settle down, our final speaker, and I should just tell you before she speaks that we're not going to do a Q&A because we have to go and march. And we're going over there. We're going over there. So we're going to be going over there. So there can be Q&A as we're going over there. But there won't be one here. My friends, Angela Davis.
Just settled into listening to Charlene. You could have taken all of my time. I'm still in the clouds because I also had the opportunity to have a short private conversation with Mumia over in the corner there. And he was asking, what are they doing? What is happening? And I said, well, you know, it's the young people always begin with a chant that involves everyone, that creates the stage for community and collectivity. And so I was saying the chant was, I believe we will win. So he joined in the chant. And I said, Brother Mumia, I really wish you could be here. He said, I am here. He said, my spirit is here. My body just has to follow. And let me, first of all, thank all of the organizers of this amazing conference. Tony Montero and I go way back. Should I say how long? We go way back. Tony was involved in the campaign for my freedom before I even had the opportunity to meet him. And we were comrades in the Communist Party on the Central Committee together. Wow, that's right. Well, anyway. We have to get together and talk about old times. But it's a major honor to be here with Brother Cornel West and Robin Kelly and Vijay Prashad and my young brother Umi. I'm sorry, maybe I should say my brother. It's okay. I'm on the board of the Dream Defenders, so I have to be careful. And of course, Johanna Fernandez and Charlene Carruthers. I was listed as also participating in a panel earlier today. Did some of you come to the panel? But I wasn't told that I was supposed to be on that panel. And as I told Mumia, I was actually doing a videotape, a video recording for a conference in Berlin that is happening at this very moment, the Rosa Luxemburg International Conference, anti-capital. Everybody knows Rosa Luxemburg, right? Right? Well, I think they're allowed to Google her. And at the conference, they have launched this major campaign to flood the offices of Tom Wolfe, the governor of this state, with freedom postcards for Mumia. So, we have to catch up with the Germans, I think. It's really an honor and pleasure to be here. And let me begin by saying that we use the term Black radical tradition in order to associate the activist and scholarly work of this moment with the anti-capitalist analysis and radical demands of what progressive historians call the long Black freedom movement. The long Black freedom movement. So since we've come together under the theme of acknowledging and extending the Black radical tradition, reclaiming our future, the Black radical tradition in our time, I want to evoke the invaluable contributions of Cedric Robinson. Black Marxism, the making of the Black radical tradition. Like Eric Williams and others, Cedric Robinson insists that capitalism has been erected on the backs of Black people and people of color. Thus, capitalism is racial capitalism. Capitalism is racial capitalism. And of course, Robin Kelley wrote a remarkable introduction to the second edition of Black Marxism. And he also wrote a whole lot of other things. But I want to specifically point to the chapter in Freedom Dreams that is entitled, "This Battlefield Called Life, Black Feminist Dreams," which emphasizes, among other things, the often unacknowledged role that Black feminism has played in forging a truly radical Black radical tradition. A truly radical Black radical tradition. I was listening to Charlene, and I leaned over to BJ, and I said, I was going to talk about that too. So I think maybe she did it better than I'm going to do it. But I wanted to talk about Haiti. And I want us to acknowledge the fact that in this part of the world, Haiti is the historical forger of the Black radical tradition. Toussaint Louverture, Jacques Dessalines. It was in Haiti that the world's first non-racial democracy emerged. In other words, the first democracy. Democracy in the US, democracy in France was democracy of the elite. Elite democracy. Which should be oxymoronic, but the prevailing recognition of democracy failed to acknowledge the irreconcilable opposition of the terms elites and democracy. I want to point to the 1805 Constitution of Haiti, Article 12. No white man, of whatever nation he may be, shall put his foot on this territory with the title of master or proprietor. Hey. Now, what is even more interesting in that Constitution, Article number 14, the Haitian shall henceforth be known only by the generic appellation of blacks, which is to say everybody who was a citizen of Haiti, regardless of what might appear to be their racial affiliation, would be considered black. That is to say, black people, the lowest of the low. Black people who were not given their freedom, but who had to struggle for that freedom. Black people should be the measure of citizenship. Black people should be the measure of humanity. If our freedom dreams, to use Robin's term, can be enriched by this proposition, what happens if we imagine black women as the measure of humanity? If racial hierarchies needed to be overturned, so then do gender hierarchies. Zora Neale Hurston reminded us that the black woman is the mule of the world. So what happens if the mules of the world become the very height of humanity? This is the question that has been posed by the uprising of young people today. This is why black feminism is so central to the black radical tradition. So what does radical mean? Aside from taking things at the root, it means opposition to racism in the tradition of Ida B. Wells. It means anti-capitalism in the tradition of Claudia Jones and Paul Robeson. It means resistance to settler colonialism in the tradition of Osceola. It means dedication to working class struggles in the tradition of Lucy Parsons Gonzalez, Henry Winston, and Hosea Hudson. It means linking art and struggle in the tradition of Max Roach and Nina Simone. It means an integrative analysis in the tradition of the Combahee River Collective and Audre Lorde. And since traditions are never only about the past, we can say that the black radical tradition encompasses, as Charlene pointed out, C.C. McDonald and the struggle for the rights of trans prisoners. It encompasses the struggle for collective leadership. And I say the struggle for collective leadership because we are just beginning to learn what that concept truly means. And the amazing organizations of young people today are teaching us what that struggle is all about. BYP 100, Dream Defenders, Black Lives Matter, and many others. Today, the black radical tradition increasingly means anti-racist, Marxist-inflected, internationalist feminism. It means acknowledging disability. It means acknowledging, as a brother pointed out yesterday evening, heteropatriarchy. It means promoting gender diversity beyond the gender binary. It means that women cannot simply be added on. You see, every point I was planning to make, you already made better, Charlie. And my example was that we cannot assume when we say that jazz is a central element of our black tradition, which it is, that we have to add women to jazz. You always hear about women and jazz, right? What does it mean? It means the entire history of jazz has to change, has to be reconceived. It means we can't simply say the black radical tradition and women. It means that we have to rethink the entire black radical tradition. But I'm straying from the topic of this session, pardon me.
That's all right.
Police, prisons, and the neoliberal state. Black people have been struggling against police and punishment forever, ever since the era of slavery. Police, racist vigilantes, are the inheritors today of a tradition that extends back to slave drivers and slave catchers. Prisons today, jails and prisons and all of the other facilities of incarceration hold something like 2.5 million people. And these institutions are inheritors of a tradition that extends back to the violence-ridden convict lease system and the southern plantation prisons like Angola and Louisiana. Here in Philadelphia, we should acknowledge this place. We should always acknowledge space and place. And we should always acknowledge who came before us. And we have failed to acknowledge that this conference is convened on land that belongs to the indigenous people. Who had no concept of land ownership, right? But of land stewardship. And look at what people who came, not only those who came willingly, but also many of us who came unwillingly. Look at what we have done. Look at what we have done. But I wanted to acknowledge Philadelphia because this is the site of the first prison that was built with individual cells, and that is the Walnut Street Jail. Philadelphia is the site of Easton State Penitentiary, which was one of the first institutions to incorporate the notion that punishment could consist of people being locked up. Prior to that, there were other forms of punishment. Well, we know a whole range of punishments that were attached to the institution of slavery. But for white people, there were stocks, the pillory, and a range of other corporal and also capital punishments. But these old forms of punishment should remind us that if they were succeeded, capital punishment was supposed to be superseded. But it's still here with us as a relic of slavery, truly as a relic of slavery, or as an indication of the extent to which slavery is still with us. Let me put it that way. The old forms of punishment should remind us that if they were superseded, along with other forms of corporal punishment as routine aspects of quotidian life, then jails and prisons have to be considered impermanent. We should be capable, as Charlene was pointing out, of finding ways of addressing problems that jails and prisons purport to solve, ways that are far less damaging to our communities. So the point that I'm making is that whenever we reflect seriously on prisons, we should begin with the insight that prisons have not always been among us and that they can be abolished in the future. Likewise, there have not always been armed forces patrolling and policing human communities. We can discover new and more effective solutions to the problem of security than armed human beings. And so it is from this abolitionist vantage point that we should judge the solutions offered by those in the conventional political establishment who are troubled by the resources that are being devoured by the process of mass incarceration. And I'm going to have to skip through some of my notes because we don't have very much time. But, well, I was going to talk about the missing black men. 25 minutes. And, I was going to talk about the fact that even the New York Times observed that 120,000 black men are between the ages of 25 and 54 are missing from everyday life. 45,000 are missing in Chicago. More than 30,000 are missing from this city. And then if you look at Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and up through Ferguson, Missouri, hundreds of thousands more are missing. This is a report that the New York Times published last spring. And they pointed out that for every 100 black women in this age group living outside of jail, there are only 83 black men. And among whites, the equivalent number is 99. That is to say, 99 men for every 100 women. Now, the report emphasizes that these missing black men have suffered death by violence or the civil death that is produced by imprisonment. And the fact that the death penalty continues to be used as a routine form of punishment, the only real questions revolving around the death penalty have to do with the most humane death-producing chemicals, which is so absurd. And as I said before, this can only be explained by the persistence of structures of slavery. This is the death penalty. And then there is what Brian Stevens calls the other death penalty. The other death penalty. That is to say, those people who receive sentences of life without possibility of parole. Because they are basically sentenced to die in prison. And I think we have to start calling it the other death penalty. It is certainly true that men constitute the vast majority of people in prison throughout the country and the world, but people often forget to ask how women and girls are affected by the phenomenon of over-incarceration. First of all, women still constitute the fastest growing sector of the imprisoned population. They suffer the collateral consequences of over-incarceration. They are the ones who make the visits, the telephone calls, the overpayment of telephone bills because of the communication companies' efforts to reap profit in that respect. But I wanted to point out that the U.S., as we know, has 25% of the entire planet's incarcerated population, with 5% of the population at large, right? So that's 25 to 5. But what is interesting is that the more than 200,000 women in prison constitutes almost 1/3 of the entire documented female prison population on the planet. Wow. Russia has 59,000 women, and China has 84,600 women. The U.S. has 200,000. But let me, move on to say that it is really impossible to understand the dynamics behind the rapid growth of the prison population for women, for men, and for gender nonconforming and trans people, without considering the impact of structural racism, and without thinking about the long material memory of these apparatuses of repression and the profit-generating role of the prison industrial complex. If we are true to the Black radical tradition, we will not, as Charlene pointed out, simply call for reform of the police. In the same way that we can't simply call for reform of jails and prisons. Reform will not work. Reform has not worked. The entire history of the police, the entire history of jails and prisons is a history of reform. And look at where we are today. And we cannot settle simply for the prosecution of those who were directly involved in the killings of Oscar Grant and Mike Brown and Freddie Gray and Tamir Rice and Sandra Bland and Miriam Carey. We cannot settle for an end to mass incarceration. I like that term, mass incarceration, but some take it to mean that if incarceration weren't mass incarceration, then it would be okay. So I think we have to say that we don't want the death penalty, and we don't want prisons, even if they are reserved for the worst of the worst, for the worst of the worst. We don't want to simply incarcerate those who commit horrible acts of violence. We want to understand why those acts happen. We want people who commit these acts to be brought into programs that will help us figure out how to banish the possibility of such harm from our communities. When they are sentenced to prison, we forget about them and we forget about their problems and our problems. We don't simply want to punish the perpetrators of gender violence. We don't want carceral feminism. We don't want carceral feminism. We want to purge our worlds of gender violence. We want to envision new forms of justice, justice that is not retributive, justice that does not reproduce harm and violence, but justice that helps us to build a more compassionate, less violent society. We want an end to policing as we know it. We want real security, like jobs and healthcare and housing and education. But all of this means that we are challenging key elements of neoliberalism, especially the neoliberal assumption that everything is potentially profitable, including policing and prisons, and that people deserve nothing by virtue of the fact that we are human beings, and that animals, like people, can be held in cages and brutalized and shot up with drugs for the production of food that causes human disease but produces an enormous amount of profit. Hello, McDonald's. The third largest corporation in the world, G4S, is a corporation that spreads policing and imprisonment practices all over the world, from Palestine and the Middle East to London and Europe to Morocco, South Africa, and the entire continent of Africa, the entire African continent. 100,000 employees of G4S can be found in 29 African countries, which means that G4S, which is the third largest corporation in the world, third only after Walmart and Foxconn, absolutely, that it is also the largest private corporation employing people on the continent of Africa. The long black freedom struggle has been facing off with police and prisons for the entirety of its history. This is the 50th anniversary of the Black Panther Party. This is 2016. This is 2016. We need to be having celebrations all over the country and the world during the year 2016. The Panthers, the Black Panther Party, got started because of the opposition to the police occupation of our communities. And Huey Newton, we heard the beginning of the wonderful essay by Mumia, Erica Huggins, Bobby Seale, George Jackson, and let me just dwell for a moment on George, because he pushed us to think beyond the category political prisoners and to begin to think about the apparatus itself as a racist institution. And I think that particularly those of us who've been involved for decades in this struggle for prison abolition, we have to be willing to acknowledge that the central ideas came from people in prison. And George Jackson was one of the first to write and to begin to talk about this issue. Now, I mentioned George also because there's a very interesting exhibit in Jerusalem at Al-Quds University in Abu Dis in Jerusalem. And the title of that exhibit, which was mounted a couple of months ago, is called George Jackson in the Sun of Palestine. Now, after George was killed, the police found, lots of papers in his cell, books and papers, including letters that I had written him that were used against me in my trial, but that's another story. But they found handwritten copies of 2 poems that were later published in the Black Panther Party under George's name, as George being the author of these poems. But he had actually copied them down, because prisons have to do that if they want to hold on to something. He had copied them from a collection of Palestinian poetry that was called Enemy of the Sun. And I remember that anthology very clearly. I still have a copy of it. It had been published by a black radical publishing company called Drum and Spear. Now, what's interesting is that that poem circulated for many years with many people thinking that it was a poem that George Jackson had written. But it was actually authored by Samuel Kassan. And let me just, can I share with you just one of the verses? You may take the last strip of my land, you may plunder my heritage, you may burn my books and my poems, or throw my flesh to the dogs. You may spread a web of terror on the rooftops of my village, O enemy of the sun, but I shall not compromise, and to the last pulse in my veins, I shall resist. I shall resist. You may deprive me of my mother's kisses. You may destroy my history. You may curse my father, my people. You may deprive my children of their smile and of life's necessities. You may fool my people with a borrowed face. You may spread a wall of terror around me. You may glue my eyes with humiliation, O enemy of the sun. But I shall not compromise, and to the last pulse in my veins, I shall resist. Well, anyway, there's several more paragraphs, but you can hear how the poem could so easily be read to capture the experiences of black people in the U.S. And so I was planning, when I thought I had a little bit more time, to talk a little bit about the traffic between the U.S. and other places. Jean Genet coming to the U.S. to support the Black Panther Party. Black Panther Party is created in New Zealand. By Black Panther Party created by Palestinians in Israel, in Brazil, and about Michel Foucault visiting Attica in the aftermath of the Attica Rebellion, and then later writing Discipline and Punish. And so as, who was saying, was that you? You have all of these wonderful pithy statements that the international is in the local as the local is in the international. And so that leads us to a critique of nationalism. And I know, as black folks in the U.S., we have thrived on nationalism. But there comes a time when we have to let it go. We have to let it go. When we have to recognize the connection between masculinism and nationalism. When, like the Palestinians, we have to begin to imagine life without a nation state. So, what does it mean to think of ourselves as citizens of an international community rather than citizens of a nation state? And so that means we have to think about the Black radical tradition in this part of the world as being so much vaster than what has been accomplished here in this country. Now, I already talked about Haiti, but what about Nanny of the Maroons in Jamaica? What about Aimé Césaire, Maryse Condé, who still lives in Paris and is still struggling against colonialism because the French still has colonies. Martinique, Guadeloupe, all of these places, and they call them La France d'outre-mer, France on the other side of the ocean. But C.L.R. James, Walter Rodney, and we have to think about links with Latin America and about Afro-Asian solidarity. Why have people around the world been so quick to identify with the Black freedom struggle at various moments in history? Why did people flock towards Ferguson? The Palestinians were the first. But all over the world, people embraced Ferguson because it has to do with the way in which they imagine their own freedom as being bound up with the freedom of Black people all over the world. The Black radical tradition is not a tradition that is owned like property by African Americans. In fact, people who are satisfied with the designation African Americans have not adopted the critical stance of the Black radical tradition, which has eschewed assimilation into oppressive structures. So why are we so quick to associate ourselves with the imperialist United States of America? But I also want to name, I'm almost done, and I want to again open up at the conclusion of my talk to call for a much more capacious notion of what counts as a Black radical tradition, because it has to include Betita Martinez from SNCC. It has to include Yuri Kochiyama. It has to, and Yuri's work extends from Malcolm X to Mumia, and Grace Lee Boggs, Detroit and the Black labor movement there, and Anne and Carl Braden, who challenged segregation, and Carl went to federal prison as a result. The Black radical tradition in our time adopts an abolitionist stance with respect to police and prisons. But the Black radical tradition, I think, has always contravened assimilationist strategies. This is why Du Bois pointed out the importance of abolition democracy. This is why Malcolm told us to beware of integrating into a sinking ship. This is why Nina Simone said, Mississippi, goddamn. And this is why, and I don't have the beautiful voice that my sister Charlene does, but this is why Teddy Pendergrass and Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes saying, wake up everybody, no more sleeping in bed. No more backward thinking, time for thinking ahead. The world has changed so very much from what it used to be. There is so much hatred, war, and poverty. So Teddy Pendergrass says we have to wake up all the teachers, and we have to wake up all the doctors, and we have to wake up all the builders. Time to build a new land. I know we can do it if we all lend a hand. The only thing we have to do is put it in our mind. Surely things will work out. They do it every time. The world won't get no better if we let it be. The world won't get no better. We got to change it. Yeah. Just you and me. Thank you.
Comrades, on that note, good night and see you tomorrow.